Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the PowerMapper, tracking who profits from the climate crisis and the shift to renewables. My name is Letlhogonolo Letshele. I am a campaign at Open Secrets, and I'll be facilitating today's discussion. Thank you to everyone for making the time to join us. We are very excited to have you being part of our conversation. Just to tell you a little bit about the PowerMapper, it is an interactive database which profiles powerful players in the energy sector. So it looks into corporations, individuals, political parties, and lobbyists, and other potential people or profiteers of the climate change crisis, as well as the transition to renewables. The PowerMapper draws from Who Has the Power, Open Secrets, first report examining South Africa's energy sector and the climate crisis. The report is essentially about who holds the power in South Africa's energy sector. So it looks through the sectors such as players in the sector such as coal, gas, diesel, and renewables, and we call these the profiteers. Just to also tell you a bit about ourselves, Open Secrets is a non-profit organization which exposes and builds accountability for private sector economic crimes through investigative research, advocacy, and the law. And as we go through the conversation, it will be apparent why we do what we do. But particularly today, our conversation will focus on the PowerMapper, and we'll look at issues around transparency and access to information regarding the energy sector in South Africa. And most importantly, we'll discuss the networks or the linkages between the power players that I was referring to, as well as the profiteering in the energy sector. We'll also look at what the PowerMapper is, the objectives and aims, what we had in mind when we were developing the PowerMapper, who the power players are in more detail, and who the power players are in South Africa's energy sector. And we will also discuss who is likely going to use the tool and can benefit from using the tool. And most importantly, how we managed to collect the data for the tool. So we have amazing speakers. I'm going to introduce them now. They are incredible. So we have Zen, Mike, and Mamello. I'm just going to quickly read their bios. Starting with Zen. Zen holds a BA in International Studies degree from Stellenbosch University and a PGDIP, in Sustainable Development from Stellenbosch University School of Public Leadership. She previously worked as a postgraduate researcher at the Center for Complex Systems in Transition, CST, where she engaged in research around state capture and governance issues. Zen is currently completing her MPhil in Sustainable Development. Next, we have Michael. Mike is the head of investigations at Open Secrets. He holds an MSc in International Development from the University of Edinburgh, a PPE honors from the University of Cape Town, and an LLB from the University of South Africa. Michael was a lead researcher on apartheid, guns, and money. And last but not least, Mamello. She's the head of campaigns at Open Secrets. She holds an MPhil in Justice Transformation from the UCT, as well as an MEC in Security Leadership and Society from King's College London. Mamello is a steering committee member of the Corruption Tracker, and before joining Open Secrets, Mamello worked at the Institute for Justice Reconciliation and the International Center for Transitional Justice. Once again, thank you to the speakers and for making time this afternoon. So in terms of the format of our discussion, we're just going to have a discussion firstly, and then after a discussion between me and the speakers, we'll take a Q&A. So for the speakers, in terms of the scope of the contribution, I'll be asking provocation questions just to guide our conversation. If you could keep your responses to about 5 minutes, that will allow for everybody to get an opportunity, and then we can take questions after. So I think we can just get started. Are we all good to get started? Awesome. I think the first question will go to Zen. I was introducing the PowerMapper, and I touched that it draws on who has the power, and being Open Secrets' first report examining the energy sector and the climate crisis. Can you briefly describe the context and background of the PowerMapper and how it relates to the report, Who Has the Power?
Great. Thanks, Letlhogonolo, and good afternoon to everybody. Yeah, I'm happy to answer the question. So the PowerMapper flows in a very direct way from the Who Has the Power report. And the report is Open Secret's first to investigate South Africa's energy sector and the climate crisis. And really in that, and in the PowerMapper as well, the aim has been to shine a light on private interests who seek to profit from South Africa's current energy crisis and the proposed energy transition. The report, and as well as the PowerMapper, focuses not only on the corporate actors that profit from South Africa's current reliance on fossil fuels, but also those that are benefiting from the transition to renewable energy sources. So in a very direct and literal way, drawing from the report, the PowerMapper maps out some of the prominent networks of private corporate power in the coal, diesel, gas, and renewable energy industries. And really, we call the corporations that dominate these sectors, as you've mentioned, energy profiteers. I think South Africa is at a critical point, facing complex social, economic, climate, and energy crises. And the rising cost of electricity, the continued lack of access to power by millions of people in South Africa has, of course, further contributed to the strain on the grid that is currently dependent on fossil fuels to function. And what the report does, and which is highlighted in the PowerMapper, that there's a disjointed and disconnected approach to South Africa's energy transition and the way in which it is transpiring at the moment. And so whether it is a continued investment in outdated and dangerous fossil fuels or a haphazard shift to renewable energy sources, the evidence is that corporations are currently set to be the key beneficiaries. And such an approach we put forward, and we hope to illustrate through a tool such as the PowerMapper, is in all likelihood, it will maintain the status quo and not address the multiple overlapping crises in South Africa that have emerged in part from a defense of private interests in the country. And it is very clear that South Africa cannot afford more of the same. And we focus on corporate actors deliberately to demonstrate that South Africa's energy and climate crisis are not only the sole fault of the state or the result of the collapse of Eskom. And in so doing, we hope to be bringing a new contribution to the ongoing conversation on the climate crisis and the energy transition in South Africa that helps to identify those corporate interests that may stand in the way of a just transition, but also that hold the power across South Africa's energy sector and across the country, and challenge these, we argue. And to challenge these, we argue, is fundamental to challenging South Africa's role in the planetary climate crisis. And I think what we also do is bring forward in the mapping of the energy sector across the country and in the report is that there's a long shadow here in how we got to where we are. I think the minerals energy complex, or the MEC, was the bedrock of the apartheid economy. And I think, just for a little bit of an elaboration on that, narrowly understood, the MEC reversed to an industrial sector made up of mining, energy, and related industries. And so if we are thinking of transitioning in South Africa and what a just transition may look like, we put forward, not only is it important to understand our current picture and historically how we got here, but interrogating that and spotlighting that and thinking very carefully in this pivotal moment, what a just transition might look like in the country and what it would mean. And we put forward that challenging corporate power and having an opportunity here to fundamentally shift things and fundamentally shift the status quo in a way that is beneficial to the people of South Africa at large. And that's what I think the PowerMapper does, and hopes to continue to do in its further development.
Thank you so much, Zen, for setting that scene nicely for us. I think so. For our next question, we'll speak to Mamello. I know Open Secret has developed a few interactive databases. We launched the Gupta Mapper earlier this year, which tracks the Gupta family's movements worldwide. And we are also developing the Prasa tracker. Yes, the trains, which tracks those who profited from the derailment of the institution. And we're also working on the Zondo tracker. So I'm mentioning this because I would like to ask, what does it take to develop a tracker, or an online database of this nature? And could you give us some idea, in terms of what goes into the development of the PowerMapper?
Yeah, thank you, Letlhogonolo. So we began developing this tool around a year ago, actually. At around this time, we started looking for developers. We developed a concept note based on the report that Zen just spoke about, Who Has the Power? And that concept note kind of roughly laid out a similar kind of map to what Zen stated, and we envisioned it initially as a network map. And it was at this point that we started looking for developers. We really wanted to work with a team that was first focused on social justice, but also had the technical skills that unfortunately we don't have in house at Open Secrets. So we contracted with Open Up. And Open Up is a civic data and technology company. Some of you may know their work. They worked on the Vuleka Mali portal created by the Budget Justice Coalition and Whose Vote Counts. That is the My Vote Counts portal. And really, we wanted kind of a similar kind of tool that focuses on social justice and the power of information in our democracy, and also a tool that can be accessible to people. And we worked towards that from the beginning of this year. But our first step, we really wanted this process to be as consultative as possible. And we started first by wanting to have a workshop with the people who we wanted to use this tool. So we wanted journalists in the room, and we wanted academics, and then we also wanted civil society organizations and social movements. So at the beginning of this year, around February, end of February, we had the people's hearing, and attached to the people's hearing were two workshops, one legal workshop and another one that was more focused on the Power Mapper. And at that first workshop, we presented a mock up that was created by Open Up in development with Open Secrets, which had taken really what we discussed as the first kind of model of what we thought the Power Mapper would look like. And there we presented it and had a conversation really about this is what we want the tool to do. And then this is what it looks like right now. Is it useful? And then we also ask questions like, have you used other tools like this? What do you not like about them? What do you find useless? What do you find useful? What do you want to see from this? What do you want to gain from this? How will you use this tool? And from that, what we really got, I think for me, what stood out the most was a lot of people were like, a lot of these tools are great, but not very useful if you're not a data scientist or a data journalist who's very in the know about how to use a tool like this. And really, what we presented to them in our own mock up was a network map which had lots of intersecting lines, which was lots of relationships showing many complex dynamics, and also lots of information about many different kinds of people. And everyone was like, that's confusing. It's not helpful for civil society. Quite frankly, the power of a lot of Open Secrets' work is in its ability to distill information and provide the narrative and explain complex systems. And what was happening with our first initial draft of the Power Mapper was that it was just way too many things going on, and that the network map was something that would be helpful, but really at the base of it, some people wanted something that was very user friendly. So we went back with Open Up, and we redrafted the concept, went back and did something that we focused on Open Secrets' strength, which is narrative, and also compiling stories about corruption and power. And basically, we came up with a tool that looks more at a map of South Africa, maps its power stations, and then kind of explains what are the central issues there. What are the outputs of this station? What are the controversies? Who are the owners? Who are the operators of that station? And really, we focused on doing that because that is a strength of the Power Mapper right now. And what we have right now with the Power Mapper is really its first phase of development. That's why we called this webinar a sneak peek. We're looking to further develop the Power Mapper and include more data around ownership, corruption, what are the scandals that have happened at each power station, related to the corporations involved in each of these different institutions. So yeah, that is essentially what the PowerMapper tool looks like. And we want to be able for this webinar for people to be able to also input feedback on what they're seeing with the tool now, because we are going to continue to develop it. It is a tool that is viewed with, we view it with as a long-term living tool that we'll continue to expand upon.
That's great. Thank you so much, Mamello, for taking us behind the scenes of the development of the mapper. I don't know if it's possible for you to give us the kind of information or show us that's the different parts of South Africa's energy sectors on the PowerMapper, just in more detail. What's in there? What can people see? How can they look at it? And how does it work?
Yeah, so I'm actually going to present it to you now. I'm going to share my screen. Just hold on. Yes. There, should have it. Okay, so this is the PowerMapper. For those of you who've not visited it yet, the website is powermapper.opensecrets.org.za, and this is the landing page. Welcome, meet South Africa's energy profiteers. And on the landing page is just a description of the PowerMapper, and then you can download who has the power here, which is basically setting out the framework for the PowerMapper. Then close that button and you have here essentially what is the tool. You can zoom in to see it and zoom out, go up. It is essentially a map of the world, but right now we focus our data inputs on South Africa. You'll see here there's one data entry in Mozambique, and that's because there is a source of power that feeds into South Africa from Mozambique, just as we have with the dams in Lesotho. You can view it either as a map or in a satellite view. This is, I don't know if you're more curious about viewing it in satellite view. And again, you can zoom in and see the terrain. I personally prefer it in map view, so I'm going to show it to you that way. That's the tool. And then if you go to the bottom, you'll see that we have a legend here. That explains why the different dots are colored in different ways. The gray dots here, which you'll see are around Mpumalanga and Limpopo, are coal-fired power stations. And then yellow would be solar. And then we have wind power in green, hydroelectricity in blue, concentrated solar power in the reddish orange, open cycle gas turbine in purple, and then one nuclear at Koeberg here. Let me just zoom in. There we go, nuclear in red. That is Koeberg power station. As you can see, if you hover over the tools, you can see just kind of a quick overview of each power station. Yeah, besides that, when you go to the legend again, you can size the points by, let me just do that. You can size the points by output. So as you can see here, though it looks like South Africa has a very diverse energy mix, that's not necessarily the truth of it. As you can see here by looking at this, is that coal really dominates South Africa's energy sector. And it's not that all these solar and wind and all of that are not necessarily a flare reflection if you're just looking at it by number of power stations. You can see here that most of our energy is generated from coal and again concentrated around Limpopo and Mpumalanga, which, as many of us will know, around because of the litigation that's gone on there, that has very adverse health impacts on the people living in that region and socioeconomic impacts for them as well. I'm going to close the sizing the outputs by the power output. And then you can actually click on some of them. So this is Mudupi. It's one of our coal-fired power stations that's had a lot of controversy. So many of us will know it. It's based in Limpopo. So when you click open one of the power stations, what you get is you get information on the type of station it is, location, the GPS coordinates, and who is the operator. In this case, it's Eskom. And then owner. This one is a bit of a complex one because owners refer to both owners and suppliers of the power station. Um, for many of these power stations, the owners are varied. There's more than one owner. What we've gone with right now is just presenting on the front the main owner or the primary owner, the main shareholder. But here in particular for Medupi, we've gone with the main supplier, which is Exaro, and that is explained in the biography here. Exaro Coal's Grootgeluk coal mine is the main provider of coal for the Medupi power station. Another cool part of the PowerMapper is that you can actually click on the biographies of each of these. So under the operator, when you open Eskom, it opens another tab to the side. And here you have the description. You have the type of company that it is. It's a state-owned company. You have the country where it's based, South Africa, when it was established, 1923. And then you have the CEO, Dan Marogane. Currently, you can't click on this, but in the future iterations of the PowerMapper, you will be able to open up the biography of Dan Marogane. And then here is what I was really talking about in my first answer, which is the narrative data. This is information we gathered from Who Has the Power and other investigative reporting by Open Secrets, and that details the controversies at Eskom, obviously beginning with load shedding and then a lot of the state capture issues. And then you can also do the same for Exaro. Some of this is not as fully populated as others. And then there you can see the major shareholders of Exaro, similar kinds of information, and then controversies as well. And then we have a filter tool on the PowerMapper. So you can actually search. So you can search for, say, Kusile, which is also another notorious power station. And there you would have it. And again, you have all that information. Here you have another player that is Siriti. Um, and again, you have all of that information. Okay. Let's remove that filter. Then you can select energy type. If you're just, say, perhaps interested in wind power, you can see all of that here, and that will spotlight, and you can kind of see where a lot of a certain type of energy is concentrated. You see here for the Western Cape in particular, wind power is a huge source of energy, though obviously coal dominates. And then you can do the same with operators. These are currently all the companies we've profiled. There's obviously way more. A lot of them are in the renewable energy sector. If you click on one of them, I would say NL Green Power, which has quite a few wind farms and solar. There you'll see, and you can click on one of theirs, and there's NL Green Power. And again, we have that data there. Okay, then I would clear that. Okay, and then also you can filter by output. Again, this helps you see who really dominates the provision of energy in South Africa. If you go anywhere above 2,000 megawatts, you are left with just coal, which again shows the dominance of coal in South Africa's energy mix. That's it. And then to go back again to learn more about the tool, you go here, just at the bottom to about this tool. And if you want to go to our data sources, click here. And then again, we have Who Has the Power, South Africa's report. There we have a list of resources at the end of that publication, all of them hyperlinked. And then another set of databases that we helped compile this was the Global Coal Plant Tracker by Global Energy Monitor and Global Energy Monitor's tool in general, which can be visited at GemWiki. Yeah, and that is it. Thank you.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Mamello. I'm sure we'll have a lot of questions in the chat box, and we do appreciate, because I mean, like you said, it's still in the development phase. I just wanted to double check, is it on our website for people to access, or is it still in the back end?
Yes, it is on our website. You can go to opensecrets.org.za. At the header bar, you'll be able to click on a tool that says tools, a button that says tools, and you should find all our tools there, including, as Letlhogonolo mentioned, our Gupta tracker as well. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Mamello, for that. We'll move to Mike, where we'll discuss some of the data issues. Remember, I was saying part of the discussion for today is to highlight some of the transparency around the energy sector and the access to information regarding the players in the energy sector. So I guess my question to you is, how did Open Secrets gather the data for the PowerMapper? And, what are some of the challenges would you say you encountered, in the data collection process?
Thanks, Letlhogonolo. Yeah, it's an interesting question. So Zen has given us a little bit of background about the Who Has the Power report and what we were trying to look at there in terms of the kind of dominant players in the energy space and who profits from the provision of energy in South Africa, kind of more broadly. And what it reminds me is that when we first set out to kind of build this tool and when we were first envisioning it, what we really wanted to include was a whole host of information about contract data that Open Secrets has been trying to access for several years from several of the most important players in South Africa's energy space. And so we, for example, had submitted access to information requests to Eskom, to the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy, as it was at the time, to PetroSA and the Central Energy Fund, to try and access contract data, not just about some of the things that Mamello has taken us through now, which is about, for example, ownership and operation of power stations. But, as Mamello was saying, there's questions about suppliers, right? If we want to answer the question about who are profiteers in this space, we need to ask questions about the whole value chain and ecosystem around coal in South Africa. Who's supplying the coal? What are the terms of the contracts? What are the terms on which renewable energy firms are providing these things? What are the terms on which PetroSA is buying diesel from suppliers, and what are the terms on which it sells it on to Eskom? And so this was the idea, is that we wanted to include all of this data. Disturbingly, but probably not that surprisingly, these state institutions have almost entirely insisted that all of this information is secret and that the public has no right to access it. And so the legal and investigative teams at Open Secrets have been, fighting these battles for long periods. And so at the moment, we have basically none of that contractual data, although the legal team is currently looking at a range of strategies in order to prize open that information. And we'll speak a little bit later about, what we would hope to include in future iterations. But I think it is just worth pausing at this point to note that it's not just an Open Secrets problem. And so one of the ways, we're trying to deal with this information or deal with this problem is through a new access to information network in civil society in South Africa, focusing on the energy sector. Open Secrets is acting as the secretariat for that. But what the experience shows there is that activists, social movements, NGOs, civil society more broadly, consistently run into this problem of entrenched secrecy in the sector and a refusal to disclose information, but also just a refusal to abide by access to information law in South Africa. And so it's a massive challenge, and one that we continue to pursue. I saw a question, in the chat about, like, is the implication here that everyone here profiled is an energy profiteer? And I'd say probably not. What the mapper needs to show is that once the data is fully there, and once the narrative data is there, it really will allow you to see through the filters who the most dominant players are and who the most powerful profiteers are, rather than individual players. But this type of information that we're trying to access and hope to access over time would also, I think, go a great distance towards showing that. What it does mean, and Letlhogonolo, just to go back to your central question, is that a large amount of the data currently contained in the mapper is publicly available information, but publicly available information that is scattered around a huge variety of different places. And so what we've done, Mamello mentioned, for example, drawing on existing data sources such as ESCOM or the Global Energy Monitor, but we've also spent a great deal of time going through companies' data, annual reports to confirm directorships and ownership of the different corporations and others that are implicated here, and also a huge amount of diverse information about corruption scandals from companies and individuals that are involved in the sector, and taken what is often quite disparate data, and I think, as Mamello shown, trying to put it into a singular place that allows us to start creating and understanding a narrative of really who dominates. Yeah, and so I guess the next question, which we'll come to a little bit later, is all of the things we continue to want to add, but I'll hold off on that for now.
Thank you so much, Mike. I think we can quickly go back to Mamello just to discuss, what were the opportunities, the hits and misses, when developing the tool. I mean, it's still in the development phase, but I mean, you could look back and, look into the future as well as to how can we better it. So yeah, I guess the question is, looking at the PowerMapper, and the entire development of the tool, what would you say were some of the hits, some of the misses, and some of the opportunities that we can learn from this process?
Yeah, so working on this has been a journey. As you have heard, we worked on it for a year. One of the hits I would say is actually seeing it come to life. I think when you have a concept or an idea and you're struggling to really iron out how it will look, and when you have really an Excel spreadsheet, getting it to look like a map and something that is usable for users is actually very nice. And we've been happy to be able to share that now with everyone. So I would say a hit is definitely today is getting to show everyone the sneak peek of the PowerMapper and the opportunity to really learn from people here once they visit it, what we could improve, how they feel about using the tool. So today is definitely a hit. A miss is something that Mike mentioned. Definitely a miss for me and for the team working on this has been the really difficult barriers we've faced with getting information. We haven't really been able to get as much of the contracting information that we'd wanted to put into the PowerMapper. Firstly, because a lot of government and state departments and state-owned companies just really do not want to abide by PIA requests. They really stonewalled a lot of our requests, so we haven't been able to display a lot of that information. So what we have right now is us engaging in long, protracted processes around access to information. But also beyond that, the information that is out there, open source information that exists, is not always replicable for every power station. So the kinds of data that we were able to find for ESCOM owned stations, we aren't able to find the same for renewable sources of energy. You'll find that a lot of the people producing in the renewable sector are independent power producers or private companies, and they don't necessarily give out the same kinds of information that ESCOM does. And I think because ESCOM has been spotlighted, rightly so, they are producing a lot more information, and they are slightly more accountable to the public than a lot of these other smaller or bigger companies that are often not based in South Africa. So we haven't been able to replicate all the data. We've also struggled with trying to really pinpoint a methodology around emissions data. ESCOM's emissions disclosures are not really very helpful in the way that we want to try to display it on the PowerMapper. And again, we can't replicate it for each power station. So we're really looking and trying to develop ways to show methane emissions and carbon emissions in a way that's helpful, which is why for this phase of the tool, we haven't shown that on the front end, is because we want to make sure that by the time it is on the front end of the PowerMapper, that it is helpful and usable and also is a complete picture. Also, it's just really difficult to get ownership data on very small companies or companies that you're not quite sure exist. Particularly, we saw with like wind farms that there were a lot of community trusts involved in the ownership of those. And it's not quite clear yet how far they're involved, when they were established, and how they work with the operation of particularly a wind farm or a solar farm. So that is definitely a miss. Information gaps, which I think will be something that comes up often in this conversation. And then opportunities is really, I think, as we've said before, this is just the first phase of this tool. In the next phase, I can see us doing a lot of great things, particularly around showing the issues of corruption and also showing the replicable power patterns. So you'll see that a lot of the owners or operators that are in the fossil fuel industry are also the new players in the renewable energy sector. So they stand to profit either way, whether we transition or not. We are still going to see the same people having power. And really, that goes to the question of what makes this transition just. And I think that information needs to get out there, because I don't think that's a conversation we're necessarily having about ownership patterns and what the just transition will look like when the fossil fuel industry also continues to stand to benefit from that. So yeah, the next phase of the development of the tool is for me an opportunity.
Thank you so much, Mamello, for that honest feedback and reflection, of the process. And I guess maybe in the second phase, we can still go back to civil society and journalists just to workshop and get some ideas around and how we can better the mapper. So there's still an opportunity to, improve on some of the things that you are mentioning. Just to say that I am seeing the questions in the chat box, but I think we'll take questions towards the end, just to wrap up our discussion quickly. Then just to bring it back into the conversation, do you think the development of the tools such as the PowerMapper are important? Is there value add, in society more broadly, having access to the tools such as PowerMapper? And, I guess maybe a follow-up question to that, we can just answer it altogether, is that, who are the intended users of the PowerMapper, the one that we currently have, and, how can we enhance its usefulness? So yeah, that would be pretty much the question.
Thanks, Letlhogonolo. I think in answering this question, Mamello and Mike have, in showing the tool and discussed some of the background, have spoken to that quite well. But just, I think, to add on to them, I think, the development of tools such as this is really important. And I think the value add is big, because we know that in South Africa's energy sector, but I don't think it's unique to the country alone, there's a lot of secrecy and issues with accessing information. So I think tools like this and mapping out the energy sector and trying to build in a collaborative way and in an ongoing way promotes transparency in South Africa's energy sector, but also helps to tell the story and to really paint the picture of the energy sector across our country, and really helps us to answer the question that guides a lot of our climate profiteers work at Open Secrets about who has the power and South Africa's energy profiteers at a time when it is critical for us to do so as the world and as the countries engaging around issues of the climate crisis and a just transition. I think just in our context, the electricity that is generated in South Africa still comes predominantly from coal, which contributes to South Africa's status as one of the world's largest carbon emitters, and has numerous health issues faced particularly by communities near power stations, oil refineries, and mines. Open Secrets hosted a people's hearing on energy profiteers at the beginning of this year, which gave a platform to those affected communities across the country to come tell the story of the ways in which their lives have been impacted for decades on end by living around communities that near power stations of oil refineries and mines. And I think South Africa, it's very clear that South Africa is directly affected by rising global temperatures and extreme climate events and is deeply vulnerable to the long-term effects of climate change, and tools that help us to build the story and to know where, at which point to tackle advocacy and campaigning for change and litigation, I think are a huge value add to the sector, but also to the public at large. And I think, South Africa, to put it in the broader context, we're faced with persistently high unemployment. In the country, 1 in 3 people are unemployed, and in the broader context of the wealth, just 1% of South Africans hold 42% of the country's wealth, which is as a result of our history. And we actually, a World Bank report about 2 years ago, I think it was in 2022, released, studied 164 countries and found that South Africa was the most unequal country in the world. So when we're talking about our energy crisis and the climate crisis, it is layered in a broader context of multiple socioeconomic crises that we're facing in the country, and that people and the planet are facing in our context. And I think the government's response to this has been to the multifaceted crises has been incoherent and inadequate. And in part, yes, this is because of contemporary state capture and corruption, which have hollowed out state institutions and gutted state finances. But it is also because powerful corporations and vested interests that have long profited from the status quo in South Africa continue to do so. They're resistant to changes in the structure on the country's energy mix, while seeking control of the pace and the nature of the change. So I think tools such as the PowerMapper, which seek to map the energy sector and the locuses of power and draw connections across the sector, and to do that on an ongoing basis, builds greater transparency, which is one of the recommendations that we put forward, both in the Who Has the Power report, but also in another recently published report a couple of weeks ago about our corporations and economic crime, about the oil and gas majors in the country. But I think, who will use the tool? We're really hoping activists, social movements will use the tool to inform advocacy efforts and advocating for change in the sector, but also in a way that helps us to not continue reinventing the wheel when we're coming to this conversation. I think journalists as well seeking to create evidence-based and data-driven stories on the climate crisis, but also seeking to input into tools such as this to make them continually more useful. And of course, academic researchers, think tanks, university students, policymakers, and of course, us as Open Secrets, as we continue to build the tool, we also refer back to it in our investigations, but also through strategic litigation and advocacy campaigns in climate profiteers work, but also curious web sleuths, I guess. And I think the vision of the PowerMapper, and as Mamello and Mike have spoken to, with this being the first step of that, really hopes to let this be a living tool that continues to build the conversation and drawing the picture. And I think while the challenges and complexity of the near future are many, I think it's possible to group these, and we've put forward, and this was also part of how we built the tracker, the mapper, and how we want to track it going forward, is there are 2 major risks that underpin the main scenarios that would undermine the pursuit of a just transition in the country. I think the first is that corporate and political interests that make up the minerals energy complex deliberately slow down or undermine efforts to decarbonize the energy mix, and water down or bypass new regulations to protect people and the environment from their activities. And the companies that make up the MEC profit from the status quo in South Africa and have historically made super profits on the back of poor people in South Africa and ordinary people in South Africa. And these companies not only contribute the vast majority of South Africa's emissions, but also consume the majority of South Africa's energy. And a clear example of this is the energy intensive user group, made up of 27 companies that consume more than 40% of all the electricity in South Africa. And which we map in the PowerMapper and hope to continue to build on that. But the risk already looms large in the South African context. The discussion on coal and oil and gas shows that major corporations and local global corporations, along with South African government, are actively pursuing significant new investments in gas exploration, while criticizing efforts to slow down failing and dirty coal plants. And corporations that look poised to benefit from this are the same local and multinational fossil fuel companies and mining companies that have long benefited from South Africa's economy and the pattern of the country's energy consumption. And the second scenario is that South Africa's rapidly changing energy mix changes in a way that increases the electricity supply and reduces emissions, but does so without changing the unequal and exploitative characteristics of the current social and economic structure that underpins the MEC. And historically, monopolistic corporations in the minerals energy complex have benefited from the exploitation of both nature and the people in South Africa. They've benefited from dangerous working conditions for the employees, while relying on unpaid care work of women to subsidize their profits. So in turn, these profits have largely been financialized or externalized, with other shrinking reinvestment into the productive and job-creating activities. So in this way, the MEC is central contributor to the wealth and inequality and the multiple social crises facing South Africa. And the mapper seeks to paint the picture of that, while also painting the current picture of what's going on and poising us to look through the future. And neither scenario outlined that I've spoken about, I think, really is inevitable. There remains like a possibility of an energy transition in South Africa that not only reduces the country's carbon emissions, but does so in a way that disrupts the economic status quo. And I think such an approach would be one way that seeks the well-being and interests of the people and puts these above the profit margins of large corporations, and would require embracing a different economic model. And a just transition, we argue and put forward and hope to continue to do in this tool, cannot bow to the interests of corporations that have always benefited from South Africa's economy. And what we're saying through mapping the locuses of power across South Africa's energy space in tools such as the PowerMapper is that, we want a just transition in the country, not just a transition.
Thank you so much, Zen, and especially for highlighting the social impact of the energy sector. It's something that we also wanted to do with the PowerMapper. So I think it's a great that you mentioned it, and I also like that you also spoke about the people's hearing and the report, where we also did to an extent highlight the social impact of the energy sector and climate change. So yeah, as we draw towards the end, I guess one last question for Mike then would be, what are the next steps for the PowerMapper? What information does Open Secrets want to add to the mapper? How can we make it more useful? Some of the opportunities that Mamello spoke about, how do we, integrate them into the next phase of the mapper?
Thanks, Letlhogonolo. So in terms of the question about what next, probably too much, because at Open Secrets we err on the side of ambition, and we've been discussing a lot just about how much we want to put in. A couple of things that I think we've mentioned already, and I'll just discuss briefly. The one is any information that's accessed by Open Secrets and potentially other civil society organizations from PIA requests. So as I've said, we've tried to access contract data that is relevant to questions of energy in South Africa. And anything that we access through PIA will be made available on the tracker, so that as that information becomes available, it will show up. I think the other big one that Mamello mentioned is we want to include much richer detail about corruption. And really that is Open Secrets' focus here, is that we haven't built the mapper to focus solely on more technical questions of energy. We want to understand ownership structures behind it. And so one of the immediate next steps is, as Mamello said, in terms of owners, suppliers, the most powerful players, that there are more fleshed out narrative profiles of who those individuals and corporations are, but also the stories of where they're implicated, both in South Africa and elsewhere, in misconduct, corruption, violations of human rights, so that also as South Africans, we know who we are dealing with when it comes to these types of actors, and of course the resources then to be able to link people to the great deal of work that's been done on this by others in South African civil society more broadly. The other thing that we want to do, Zen has spoken a little bit about our latest report on the oil and gas majors, is that currently the mapper looks at nationally all power stations currently operating in the country. Another huge part of the energy mix in South Africa, especially forward-looking, is this push by certain political interests, but also certain large corporate interests for massive offshore oil and gas exploration. And so another thing that we would like to add to the mapper in future iterations is the world of oil and gas that's not currently being used for energy production in South Africa, but is part of very much part of the narrative about energy profiteers, certainly over the short term in South Africa. And then the other thing is that, of course, the reason we know so much about these stories in terms of the impact on people is the incredible work by civil society and journalists already in South Africa to tackle this. So whether it's about the cases that have been brought by social movements and NGOs for the deadly air case in Mpumalanga to try and stop, the huge impact on communities from emissions from coal plants, or it's the litigation to ensure public participation for offshore oil and gas exploration, or if it's about community involvement in renewables projects. All of those, or many of those cases, have come before courts or regulatory bodies, and there's so much information, again, in different places that show the resistance to energy profiteering, and we very much want to make sure that that is also part of this narrative. And then there were three other things that I wanted to touch on very briefly. The one is this comment that's come up about high users of electricity. And I think that is another thing that in the long run might be very exciting to include in the PowerMapper. Open Secrets recently released a report on how the aluminium smelters in Richards Bay, for example, get secretive pricing agreements with Eskom that ties their increases to inflation, while all of us on this call are facing orders of magnitude higher increases in electricity costs. And of course, as Alan said in that comment, it's not just traditional high energy users like aluminium smelters, it's also the whole new world of data centers and AI, which is another thing that we and others have been looking at in South Africa. And so I think from energy consumption is another thing that might really be interesting to build in. And then two process points. I wanted to flag that there is currently an opening for a research consultant at Open Secrets specifically to work on the PowerMapper in the first few months of next year. If you go to our website, you have until Monday to apply to that. So if you or someone you know might be interested who wants to do this, please spread the word. And then, of course, the other is that, there's been such great engagement in the comments on this. And I think so many people who will look at the mapper today will have ideas about what to include. And we really encourage you to email us. So if you want to send an email to advocacy@opensecrets.org.za, we can put that in the chat as well, with your ideas about what would be useful. We won't be able to do everything, and it depends on what's possible, but we really welcome the feedback about things that you think are missing, or things that would be helpful and that would make the tool more user-friendly and more powerful. Thanks, Letlhogonolo.
Thank you so much, Mike, and also for just, casually, responding to that question that was in the chat box, and also the advert for the researcher. I guess I'll just take a few questions because we don't have a lot of time. I remember when Mamello was speaking, there was a question for her on how frequently do we, update the data. Mamello, if you can just give a quick response to that.
So currently our model has been, so we've done the first update, that's now, that is all the data that is up there. And we are continually working on the back end with updating that data. And we are going to have the next iteration of the data completed by the end of March. We're likely only to update that by July. We don't currently have a policy yet up on the front end of the website about how frequently the data is updated. But for now, what you can access has been updated as most recently as yesterday. And we will do the next round again, obviously, as I said, in March, and it'll be available by the middle of the year. And we will continually update everyone on our newsletter about updates to the PowerMapper, what new features are coming out. We will also update people on our social media. So please do like, subscribe, follow us on all the platforms, and we will be able to get that information out to you.
That's great. Thank you so much, Mamello. Just another question to Mike from Elena. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. How do the actions of these energy profiteers translate into concrete challenges for households, especially in terms of rising costs or unreliable energy costs?
Yeah, it's such a powerful question, and I think that there's been some back and forth in the chat already about this. But I would reiterate what I'd said towards the end of my previous contribution, which is that there is a discrepancy between the experience of large corporations in South Africa and the experience of everyday consumers. And so we know, for example, that there's a great differential in the pricing that is paid, that everyday consumers are having to pay a lot more for energy. And I think, Elana, you made this point later, that it's not only about the price of electricity, and for millions of South Africans having to choose between energy and food. I mean, it's an extraordinary kind of injustice, but also, the rolling blackouts that we've been lucky not to have for a few months, but there's no guarantee that they won't return. Just the impact that has on safety, dignity, and a whole range of other rights that South Africans have. I think, what this tool can go to show, and what we're hoping to build in over the long run as well, is how that system is not some kind of technical accident, that we just didn't get the systems right, that was, as Zen has kept saying, it's been about power and profit. It's about all the people who have extracted from the energy space in so many different ways. And of course, they've been able to do so because they've been operating in secrecy. And so we kind of return then full circle to, how to challenge that is to try and challenge it by forcing greater transparency. And this is one of the tools that hopes to do so.
Thanks so much, Mike. Another question, I think this is for you, Zen. The question around how is this tool different from other tools, I guess related tools?
Sure, I can take that. And just to follow on from some of the questions that have come up and from Mike's contribution about the water discussion, I think it is important for us in the space that are dealing with trying to map the sector and to address the climate crisis to start thinking about the ways in which water is an important question. I think I was at the mining dub at the beginning of the year, and it was really interesting being in a room full of the people that were there and hearing how they were, slight notes, if you're listening carefully, of how corporations are now slowly edging into the space and trying to privatize water. And I think this is an important part of the conversation, definitely, and something we maybe preemptively can try to start to look at a civil society and in the sector. But I think about the question of how is this tool different, I think in many ways it is different, and in many ways it's similar. I think in civil society, there are different pockets of us that are often working on similar things. And I think collaborating is one of the ways that we especially at Open Secrets, and I think other civil society organizations as well, want to develop some of these tools together, because it's empowering when we come together, and how we can learn from each other and our own hits, misses, and opportunities. And I think the civil society working group on state capture is a similar example of that. There was a couple of organizations doing similar work on state capture and corruption at a time when there was a window of opportunity for us as civil society to come together on that, and to have 20 plus civil society organizations kind of coming together and collaborating in that space, I think has been really impactful. And I think this space is one of the ways in which we're also envisioning our climate profiteers work, especially at Open Secrets, to go, and has been pivotal in the way we've thought about things and want to continue to do that. And as Mamello and Mike have mentioned, this is the first phase sneak peek of a developing tool with a very ambitious end product and a very ambitious inception concept, and it's more having an end goal in mind and more just the stepping stones of how we get there, and yeah, we hope that we will.
Thank you so much, Zen. That was quite a comprehensive response. Just another question, I think it's from YouTube. It says, do you plan to release the backend data perhaps in a comprehensive reports once you've built up sufficient data? Mamello, can you take this one, please?
Yeah. So Rocket Man's apprentice, I'm going to say that we are continually actually using the tool. So our information that is on the PowerMapper will obviously feed into our investigative reports. It'll feed into our campaigning, and hopefully it'll be used by other people. The backend data, I didn't actually explain how we actually feed the data into the front end of the PowerMapper. So we actually use Airtable, and we have an intersecting we have a few tables that are intersecting data. And we can, if anyone wants to use that as a resource, please email advocacy.opensecrets.org.za. We can export that for you in Excel form or CSV form. If you would like to use the data on the back end, we would just filter it for you with what we've already published and information that's verified. So definitely reach out to us if you would like to use it, and please just cite it. But otherwise, it is available, and we will be using it in our own investigative reporting.
Thank you so much, Mamello. I think we have reached the end of our discussions. I'm just going to check with the speakers if there's anything that you wanted to share, maybe respond to some of the questions that I perhaps did not see. Mamello says no. Zen, are you content? Mike, any last words from you?
I would just say I saw the comment from Penny Herbst in the chat, and I think it is absolutely correct that not to get diverted too far from the discussion here, but one of the things we're seeing right now with the government of national unity is charging headlong into broadly categorized market reforms that we leave South Africa's energy transition to the market, and the corporations will take care of it for us. And I think what the mapper goes to show in many ways is that the corporate interests have long dictated and held the space along with powerful state-owned companies, and it hasn't necessarily led to any kind of justice from an energy perspective. And as Penny's point says, the transition is going to be extraordinarily expensive, and there needs to be a full and transparent public accounting and discussion about how it will be managed. And then maybe the last thing, which is just to say that, so Mamello's made the point that we've made the point about the mapper to contact us, advocacy at Open Secrets. But I've also seen so many individuals in the chat, with different stories and information. And if people have leads that they think also need to be investigated, also really important to note that we are keen to hear those, so you can get in touch with us about those as well.
Thank you so much, Mike, for those last words, and thank you to the speakers as well for your time, and also to the people that kept on, engaging in the chat box. We did take some of the suggestions forward. Just also say this is a work in progress, and we appreciate your time being with us this afternoon, and we are happy to hear your suggestion. I think the email is on the chat box, advocacy@opensecrets.org, for some of the suggestion. And the job as well, the researcher vacancy that's open, please do apply if you'd like to work on the PowerMapper. We are very cool people, I promise. And just also on the link as well to our reports, this is the Who Has the Power that we've been referring to. Some of the questions that people are asking are in here. There's a link in the chat box, just click on it. And also a link to the report that we also launched, I think a week or two ago, CCR, on oil and gas majors. That's also an interesting read that you'd want to look at. Just to say thank you everyone for taking the time this afternoon to be with us and engage with us on the PowerMapper. Just to add, also, we're going to have another webinar next week, but this is on the Zondo tracker. This is where we are checking Zondo's recommendations and the institutions that are supposed to be implementing those recommendations. So please do join us. It's on Tuesday, the 5th of November at 12 o'clock. Thank you everyone for your time. We really appreciate it. Thank you to the speakers. Thanks to the people that are working on the back end. Yeah, cheers for now. Chat soon. Bye-bye. Bye.